Chapter 4. The Edge. The Atlantic stretched endless and unyielding before the bow of El Halcón, Captain Rojas's weathered fishing boat, its hull creaking as it cut through the glassy sea on a July morning in 1976. The air was heavy with salt and the faint tang of diesel, the horizon a razor line where ocean met sky, unbroken by cloud or wind. Elias Marrow stood at the stern, his boots braced against the deck's sway, his eyes fixed on the water, its surface unnaturally still, a mirror reflecting nothing but the trench's invisible pull, 20 miles ahead. The reel-to-reel tape from 1969, labeled Arecibo, July 20th, 69 m. Rivera, weighed heavy in the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. El Halcón was a 40-foot relic, its paint chipped to reveal rust, its deck cluttered with nets, fuel cans, and a tarp covering La Serena, the patchwork submersible that would carry them to the trench's depths. The boat's engine growled, a steady rumble that vibrated through Elias's boots. But the sea's silence was louder, a hush that felt alive, expectant, like it was holding its breath. Rojas stood at the helm, his grizzled frame hunched over the wheel, his navy surplus jacket stained with grease, his pale blue eyes scanning the horizon, sharp but wary, like a man who'd sailed too close to the edge before. The crew was just the two of them, a decision born of necessity. Rojas's smuggling bust had left him short-handed, and Elias trusted no one else with the tape, the mission, the truth. The chant echoed in his head, a pulse that matched his heartbeat, whispering of Spiral's eyes, a presence that knew his name, his sins, his hunger. Elias knelt beside a crate, his hands moving with obsessive precision, checking the equipment he'd scavenged and begged for. A portable tape recorder, its batteries fresh, ready to capture the signal. A 16mm camera, its lens scratched but functional, loaded with film to record whatever waited below. Nautical charts, their edges curled, marked with red ink tracing the trench's contours, cross-referenced with Navy reports of sonar anomalies and Don Pepe's tales of shredded nets. He tested the recorder, its reels spinning, the hiss of blank tape a faint echo of the chant, and checked the camera's focus, aiming it at the sea, its glassy surface a lie that hid the abyss. The charts were spread on the deck, weighted with rusted bolts, their lines a map to the trench's heart, a chasm deeper than any charted, a wound in the ocean's floor that called him, a summons he couldn't resist. "Stop fussing," Rojas growled from the helm, his voice cutting through the engine's drone, his accent a mix of Puerto Rican and mainland grit. "Gear's fine. Sea's too quiet, that's what you should worry about." He didn't look at Elias, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but his hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale, a crack in his tough exterior. Elias stood, wiping sweat from his brow, the canvas bag with the tape never leaving his side. "Quiet's good," he said, his voice rough, scraped raw by nicotine and sleepless nights. "Means we'll hear it if it's there." He meant the signal, the chant, the pulse that had haunted him since the tape, that had sparked visions of spirals and eyes, that had played through an unplugged radio, a violation of everything he'd learned at MIT. He lit a Camel, the match's flare casting shadows across the deck, the smoke curling like a ghost, a shield against the sea's eerie calm. Rojas snorted, adjusting the throttle, the engine's growl deepening. "You don't know this water," he said, his voice low, heavy with memory. "I do. Sailed it for the Navy 60s before I went rogue. Did a dive op, 68, near the trench, classified, some ONI spook calling the shots. 3 divers went down, good men, trained for deep ops. They were mapping, looking for something, wreck, sub, nobody said what. Sonar showed movement, shapes, too fast, too big. Last transmission was a scream, not pain, not fear, something else, like they saw God and it wasn't kind. We pulled up cables, no divers, no gear, just blood in the water, red as this boat's paint. Navy shut it down, said it was a gear failure, but I saw the logs, heard the tape. Wasn't no failure." He paused, his eyes flicking to Elias, hard searching. "You're chasing that scream, gringo. Hope your tape's worth it." Elias's heart pounded, the chant louder now, a pulse that matched Rojas's story, the blood in the water a mirror to the Navy reports he'd found. Sonar anomalies, a vanished destroyer, a cover-up stamped disavow. He clutched the bag, the tape's case warm through the canvas, impossibly so, like it was alive. "It's worth it," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, the memory of the black sedan, its tinted windows watching, the stolen notebook a wound that hadn't healed. "I've got proof, witnesses' files, the tape. Something's down there, Rojas, not human, not natural. I'll record it, show the world, make them choke on their own smug. His words echoed his MIT lectures, his fall, the Boston Globe's cartoon of him in a tinfoil hat, a vow to prove he wasn't crazy, that his life's ruin wasn't for nothing. Rojas shook his head, his jaw tight, but he didn't argue, just steered El Halcón onward. The sea's stillness a weight that pressed against the hull, the horizon unbroken, the trenches pull stronger with every mile. Elias returned to his equipment, checking the tape recorder's batteries again, rewinding the blank tape, testing the microphone, his hands moving on instinct, a ritual to keep the fear at bay. The camera's film was secure, its case battered but sealed, ready to capture the green light Don Pepe had seen, the singing disc Javier had heard, the god Miguel feared. The charts were his map, their red ink a lifeline, marking the trench's edge, the coordinates where the USS Calhoun had vanished, where sonar had gone haywire, where the Luz del Abismo waited. The sea remained still, a glass sheet that reflected nothing. Not even the sun, now high, its heat a furnace that burned through Elias's shirt, his skin prickling with sweat and something else, a prickle that wasn't heat but presence, like the eyes in his dreams spiraling, watching. He glanced at Rojas, expecting a quip, a warning, but the captain was silent, his eyes fixed on the water, his hands steady but tense, like he felt it too, the sea's unnatural calm, the trench's whisper. Then a faint hum rose, not from the engine but from the sea itself, a low, throbbing pulse that wasn't sound but vibration, crawling up Elias's spine, sinking with the chant in his head. He leaned over the rail, peering into the water, and froze. Beneath the surface, a swarm of jellyfish pulsed, not drifting but moving with purpose, their translucent bodies glowing with an fluorescent purple light, the same hue as the horizons, their tendrils not trailing but weaving, forming spirals that matched the patterns in his notebook, the crack in El Coral's mirror, the eyes in his dreams. The jellyfish pressed closer, hundreds, thousands, their bodies crowding the hull, their tendrils snaking upward, not stinging but grasping, wrapping the propeller in a writhing mass that choked the engine, the growl faltering into a whine. Elias's breath caught, his heart pounding, the chant louder now, a pulse that wasn't just in his head but in the water, the jellyfish, their glowing forms not random but deliberate, a network, a mind, a piece of the trench's god. They pulsed in unison, their spirals tightening, their tendrils fouling the prop, not to kill but to hold, to watch, to claim, their light flaring. Rojas cursed, yanking the throttle, but the engine sputtered, the boat lurching, trapped by the jellyfish's grip, a living snare that wasn't animal but alien, a warning that wasn't warning but invitation, a summons to the abyss. He jammed it into reverse, then full throttle forward. Time again, shredding jellies by the hundreds, until finally the boat limped forward again. Elias lit another cigarette, the smoke curling toward the sky, and checked the charts again, his fingers tracing the trench's contours, a wound that matched the spirals in his notebook, the crack in El Coral's mirror. El Halcón sailed on, the engine's growl restored as Rojas freed the prop with a desperate wrench, but the hum lingered, the jellyfish retreating into the depths, their light fading but not gone, a presence that wasn't absent but waiting, watching, claiming. The trench was close, its call a pulse in his bones, whispering his name, and Elias would answer, no matter what waited below, no matter what it cost. The Atlantic lay flat and unyielding around El Halcón, Rojas's weathered fishing boat, its hull creaking as it sliced through the still sea, the horizon a taut line where water met sky. It was dusk, the ocean painted in hues of bruised purple and molten orange, a beauty that felt like a lie, hiding the trenches pulled 20 miles ahead. Elias Marrow stood at the bow, his boots braced against the deck's gentle sway, his eyes scanning the water for any sign of the Luz del Abismo, the light of the abyss. His denim shirt was stiff with dried sweat, his gray-streaked beard itched, his eyes burned from sleepless nights haunted by dreams of drowning in a sea of stars. The sea's unnatural stillness held, a glass sheet unbroken by wind or wave, its surface reflecting the dying sun in a way that made Elias's skin prickle, as if the ocean itself was watching, waiting. La Serena, the patchwork submersible, lay under a tarp at the stern, its rusted hull a gamble Elias had no choice but to take. Rojas stood at the helm, his grizzled frame silhouetted against the dusk, his navy surplus jacket stained with grease, his pale blue eyes fixed on the horizon, wary, like a man who'd seen the sea's teeth and lived. The engine's growl was a low constant, vibrating through the deck, but the silence beyond it was heavier, a hush that carried the trench's weight, a chasm that whispered Elias's name, his sins, his hunger. The sun sank lower, its light bleeding into the sea, and then Elias saw it, a green glow, faint but undeniable, flickering on the horizon like a heartbeat, brief as a blink, gone before he could point. His breath caught, his heart racing, the chant in his head surging, a pulse that matched the glow, the tape, the trench. "Rojas!" he shouted, his voice cracking, raw with excitement, his boots thudding as he ran to the helm, the bag bouncing against his hip. "Did you see that? Green out there, just now. It's real, it's the light." He pointed to the horizon, now dark. The glow vanished, but his eyes were wild, his hands trembling. The tape's weight a confirmation, a vow. Rojas's jaw tightened, his hands steady on the wheel but his eyes darkening, a storm brewing behind their pale blue. "Saw it," he said, his voice a growl, low and heavy, his accent clipped, like he was biting back fear. "Ain't no flare, no ship. Seen it before, 68, that Navy op I told you about. Glow like that, right before the divers went down, before the scream. You're happy, gringo, but that light ain't welcoming you. It's marking you." He didn't look at Elias, his gaze fixed on the water, the engine's growl a steady pulse, but his knuckles were white, his shoulders tense. A man who knew the sea's hunger and felt it now, closer than ever. Elias's excitement burned hotter, drowning Rojas's dread. The chant of fire in his chest, the glow a beacon to the truth he'd chased since MIT. "Marking me or not, it's proof," he said, his voice fierce, his cigarette forgotten, burning to ash in his hand. "Don Pepe saw it, Javier heard it sing, the Navy buried it. That light's what's on the tape, what's in the trench. We're close, Rojas, closer than anyone's been. We dive tomorrow, record it, show the world." He paced the deck, his boots scuffing, his mind racing, piecing together the glow, the chant, the Navy reports of sonar anomalies, the vanished USS Calhoun, the spirals that matched the crack in El Coral's mirror, the eyes in his dreams. It was real, not folklore, not madness, but data, a signal he'd capture, a truth he'd shove in the faces of the suits who'd laughed him out of academia. Rojas turned, his eyes meeting Elias's, hard, unyielding, a captain facing a storm he couldn't outrun. "You're blind," he said, his voice low, cutting through the engine's drone. "That light ain't proof, it's a warning. I've sailed this water 20 years, seen boats go out and not come back, heard stories, fishermen, divers, kids, all gone near the trench. You think you're different, with your tape, your camera, your charts, but the sea don't care about proof. It takes, gringo, and it's got its eye on you." He pointed to the horizon where the glow had flickered, his hand steady but his voice trembling, a crack in his grizzled armor, a man who'd heard the divers scream and carried it still. Elias stopped pacing, the chant louder now, a pulse that drowned Rojas's words, the tape's weight a vow he couldn't break. "I'm not turning back," he said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on Rojas, the glow's memory of fire that burned away doubt. "I've lost everything, my job, my wife, my name. This is what's left, Rojas. The trench, the light, the truth. You're getting paid, you dive, that's the deal." His words were a blade, sharp with the desperation that had kept him alive, the need to prove he wasn't crazy, that his life's ruin wasn't for nothing. Rojas snorted, turning back to the helm, his hands adjusting the throttle, the engine's growl deepening. "Your funeral," he muttered, but his eyes stayed on the water, scanning for the glow, for the trench's next move. The sea remained still, its surface a mirror that reflected nothing. Not the dusk, not the stars emerging above, a void that swallowed light and gave nothing back. Rojas cut the engines, throwing the covers of the sub. La Serena, the patchwork submersible, glinted faintly under the boat's floodlights, a cobbled-together vessel that looked more like a coffin than a lifeline. Rojas moved with practiced efficiency, his grizzled frame hunched over the sub, checking cables and oxygen tanks, his Navy surplus jacket stained with grease, his pale blue eyes sharp but shadowed with dread. The engine was silent now, the anchor chains clank fading, leaving only the sea's hush, a void that swallowed sound and light. The boat caught anchor with a jerk, a few hundred feet before the rift, which spiraled down thousands of feet. Elias knelt beside La Serena, his hands trembling as he prepared for the dive, the floodlights casting harsh shadows across his gaunt face, hollowed by coffee and paranoia. He tested the tape recorder, its microphone humming, the blank tape hissing like a faint echo of the chant, a ritual to steady his nerves against the sea's eerie calm, Rojas's story of vanished divers, the green glow that had marked them hours ago. The camera was secure, its case battered but sealed, ready to capture the truth he'd chased since MIT, since his fall, since the faculty sneers and Ellen's goodbye. He unfolded the charts, their edges curled, tracing the trench's contours with a shaking finger. The coordinates aligning with Navy reports of sonar anomalies, the vanished USS Calhoun, the scream Rojas had heard in '68. The chant was louder now, a pulse in his bones, whispering his name, a summons he couldn't resist. Rojas climbed onto the sub, his boots thudding, and checked the hatch, his movements mechanical but tense, like a man preparing for a fight he didn't expect to win. "Gears set," he growled, his voice low, his accent a mix of Puerto Rican and mainland grit. "Oxygen's good, sonar's up, cameras wired. We dive at dawn, 6 hours down if she holds." He paused, his eyes meeting Elias's, hard, searching, a captain facing a storm he couldn't outrun. "You sure about this, gringo? That glow we saw, it ain't inviting us for coffee. You heard my story, divers gone, blood in the water. You dive, you're rolling dice with the devil." Elias stood, the tape's weight steadying him, his cigarette forgotten, burning to ash in his hand. "I'm sure," he said, his voice fierce, his eyes wild with the fire that had kept him alive since his ruin. "I've got proof, witnesses, files, the tape. Something's down there, Rojas, not human, not natural. I'll record it, film it, prove them wrong, the suits, the skeptics, the world. This is my shot, my only shot." His words echoed his MIT lectures, his fall, the Boston Globe's cartoon of him in a tinfoil hat, a vow to silence the doubts that screamed in the dark, to make his life's ruin mean something. Rojas snorted, turning to adjust a cable, his hand steady but his jaw tight, his dread a weight that hung between them. "Your funeral," he muttered, but his eyes flicked to the water, its blackness a mirror to the trench's hunger, a chasm that took and gave nothing back. Elias moved to the sub's control panel, a tangle of mismatched gauges and blinking lights, and checked the sonar, its green screen humming, a faint echo of the glow they'd seen, the light that had marked him, that matched the chant's pulse. He grabbed the tape recorder, its weight grounding him, and spoke into the microphone, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, the sea's hush pressing against him. "This is Elias Marrow, July 12, 1976, aboard El Halcon, anchored at the trench's edge," he said, the recorder's reels spinning, capturing his vow. "I'm a scientist, was an astronomer at MIT, and I'm here to prove them wrong. The trench holds something, signals, lights, a presence. I've got a tape from '69, a chant, not human, tied to the Luz del Abismo. Witnesses Don Pepe, Javier, Miguel saw it, heard it. Navy files confirm it, sonar anomalies, a lost ship, a cover-up. Tonight, we saw a green glow, real, undeniable. Tomorrow, we dive with La Serena, to record, to film, to show the world. They laughed, they buried me, but I'll make them choke on their own smug." He stopped, his breath ragged, the chant in his head a pulse that matched his words, a fire that burned away fear, doubt, the warnings of Rosa, Miguel, the black sedan's gaze. The radio crackled, a sudden burst of static that made Elias flinch, the recorder nearly slipping from his hands. "Elias, you there?" Rosa's voice, faint but urgent, cut through the hiss, her accent thick, her tone raw with fear. "It's Rosa from La Luna. You gotta turn back, lover. I heard from a fisherman, bad omens, lights in the water, same as my papa's night. The trench, it's hungry, Elias. Please come back to me." Her words were a plea, a mirror to her story of her father's empty boat, the sea's theft, a warning that carried the weight of her tears, her loss, her strength. Elias stared at the radio, its speaker a lifeline to shore, to sanity, to Rosa's body, her life, her world of bars and rum and life. His hand hovered over the mic, his heart aching, not just for her, but for the man he'd been, Doctor. Marrow, husband, teacher, before the signals, before the tape, before the trench. The chant surged, a pulse in his bones, whispering his name, drowning Rosa's voice, her fear, her care. "I can't," he said, his voice low, not to the radio but to himself, a vow to the tape, the truth, the God. He switched off the radio, the static dying, Rosa's plea cut short, a door closed, a bridge burned. He set the recorder down, its reels still spinning, capturing the silence, the sea's hush, the trench's call. Rojas watched, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing, just climbed into La Serena, checking the oxygen valves, his movements a ritual to keep his own fear at bay. The floodlights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the deck, the sub's hull a patchwork of rust and hope, a vessel barely seaworthy but Elias's only way down. He lit another cigarette, the smoke curling toward the stars, and stared at the water, its blackness a void that swallowed light, a mirror to the trench's hunger. El Halcon rocked gently, the anchor chain creaking, The sea's silence a challenge, a promise, a threat. The dive was hours away, the trench close, its call a pulse in his bones, whispering his name, and Elias would answer. No matter what waited below, no matter what it cost, no matter what it was, ship, God, or something worse. The Atlantic was a void of black glass, its surface swallowing the faint glow of El Halcon's floodlights as the boat held anchor at the edge of the trench, 20 miles off Arecibo. It was the early hours of July 13th, 1976, the air thick with salt and the sharp tang of rust. The sea's silence a weight that pressed against the hull, a hush that carried the trench's hunger. Elias Marrow sat inside La Serena, the patchwork submersible, its claustrophobic interior a tangle of wires, gauges, and bolted seats, the air stale with oil and sweat. The reel-to-reel tape from 1969, labeled Arecibo, July 20th, 69 Rivera, was secured in a waterproof case beside him. La Serena's hull creaked as Rojas powered up the systems, the control panel blinking with mismatched lights, some flickering, others dead, the sonar screen humming with a green glow that echoed the light they'd seen at dusk. Rojas, his grizzled frame hunched in the pilot's seat, checked the oxygen valves, his navy surplus jacket stained with grease, his pale blue eyes sharp but shadowed with dread, a man who'd heard the divers scream in '68 and felt its echo now. Elias's equipment was stowed in the sub's cramped hold. Elias tested the tape recorder, its microphone humming, the blank tape hissing like a faint echo of the chant, a ritual to anchor him against the sub's claustrophobia, the sea's hush, Rojas's dread. The camera was secure, its case bolted to the sub's frame, ready to capture the truth he'd chased since MIT, since his fall, since the faculty sneers and Ellen's goodbye. He glanced at the sonar, its green blip steady but erratic, like a heartbeat skipping, a reminder of the Navy reports. Sonar anomalies, a vanished destroyer, a cover-up stamped disavow. The chant was louder now, a pulse in his bones, whispering his name, a summons he couldn't resist. Rojas sealed the hatch, the clang echoing in the sub's tight space, a finality that made Elias's heart kick. "Systems green," Rojas said, his voice a growl, his accent clipped, his hands steady on the controls but his jaw tight, a man bracing for a storm. 6 hours oxygen, 12,000 feet max, maybe less if the hull complains. Sonar's mapping, cameras rolling. "You ready, gringo, or you want to pray first?" His eyes flicked to Elias, hard, searching, a captain who'd seen the trench's teeth and feared them still. Elias clutched the tape's case, its warmth a vow, a curse, a key. "No prayers," he said, his voice fierce, his eyes wild with the fire that had kept him alive since his ruin. "I'm ready. Let's dive, find it, record it. The world's gonna see what's down there." His words were a blade, sharp with the desperation that had driven him to this edge, the need to prove he wasn't crazy, that his life's ruin wasn't for nothing. The chant surged, a pulse that matched his heartbeat, drowning Rojas's dread, Rose's plea, the black sedan's gaze. Rojas snorted, flipping switches, the sub's lights buzzing to life, casting a harsh glow through the scratched plexiglass dome. El Halcon's winch groaned above, lowering La Serena into the water, the sea's embrace cold and immediate, the hull shuddering as it submerged. The sub's propeller hummed, a low vibration that shook Elias's bones, and they descended, the floodlights cutting through the black, revealing nothing but water, endless, unyielding, a void that swallowed light and gave nothing back. The sonar pinged, its rhythm erratic, a heartbeat that wasn't human, a mirror to the chant in Elias's head, the green glow they'd seen, the eyes in his dreams. Then the radio crackled, a burst of static that made Elias flinch, the tape recorder nearly slipping from his hands. It wasn't Rosa, not this time, but the signal, the chant, the pulse, the wet, guttural sound from the tape, louder now, almost alive, pouring through the sub's speakers, filling the tight space with a presence that wasn't sound but intent, a voice that wasn't human but knew him, saw him, claimed him. "Jesus," Rojas hissed, his hands freezing on the controls, his eyes wide, the dread he'd carried breaking through. "What the hell is that?" "That's your tape, gringo." He reached for the radio, twisting dials, but the chant didn't stop, growing clearer, not words but a summons, a pulse that shook the hull, the gauges, Elias's bones. Elias, Elias, Elias. Elias's heart pounded, his breath shallow, his hands clutching the tape's case, its warmth burning now, a coal against his chest. "It's the signal," he said, his voice trembling but fierce, his eyes locked on the sonar, its green blips dancing, spiraling, like the curves in his notebook, the crack in El Coral's mirror, the eyes in his dreams. It's real, Rojas. It's down there, calling us. Keep going. We're close. We're so close. His excitement was a fire, burning away fear, doubt, the sub's creaks, the sea's weight. The chant was in him, through him, a pulse that matched his heartbeat, whispering his name, a truth he'd die to uncover, a god he'd meet, no matter what it was. Rojas cursed, his hands moving again, the sub descending faster, the depth gauge ticking past 1,000 feet. 2,000, the pressure a weight that made the hull groan, the plexiglass dome creaking like it might crack. "You're loco," he muttered, but he didn't turn back, his eyes flicking between the sonar and the void outside, the floodlights revealing nothing but water, black and endless, a sea that wasn't empty but alive, watching. The chant grew louder, the radio speakers vibrating, the sound not just heard but felt, a vibration that shook Elias's teeth, his spine, his soul, a presence that wasn't sound but intent, a summons that clawed at his mind, pulling him deeper, to the trench, to the light. The sonar pinged faster, its blips coalescing into shapes, disks, spirals, things that moved too fast, too deep, echoing the Navy's anomalies, Javier's disk, Pepe's light. Elias grabbed the camera, his hands shaking, aiming it through the dome, the film rolling, ready to capture whatever waited below. The tape recorder hummed, its reels spinning, capturing the chant, the signal, the truth. The depth gauge hit 3,000 feet, the hull's groans louder, the sea's blackness a weight that pressed against the sub, a mirror to the trench's hunger. Elias's breath came in gasps, his eyes wide, his heart racing, the chant a pulse in his bones, whispering his name, a summons he couldn't resist, a truth he'd die to uncover. La Serena plunged into the dark, the floodlights fading, the sonar's green glow the only light, a beacon to the abyss. The chant was everywhere, alive, a voice that knew Elias, saw him, claimed him, a god that wasn't a god but something older, eternal, waiting. The sub descended, the depth gauge ticking, the hull creaking, the sea closing in, and Elias leaned forward, his eyes locked on the void, the tape's pulse his guide, the trenches call his destiny, a wound in the world that whispered his name.